Welcome in to the American Express Breakdown Show for 2025. Chris and I are back again. We've got 2 weeks in a row. We're going to get this going throughout the year like we talked about last week. So really excited to do this again here this week. How are you feeling about last week? We had the first full field event at the Sony. Kind of could have went better for me. Had a few guys. It felt like that cut line really just slit my week. But there were some, positive things that we hit on. But anything you want to touch on from last week, and how are you feeling about the American Express?
Yeah, short on last week. First week for me back into the DFS land, and Luke Clanton really let me down. He was right there. Him and Ben Griffin. Daniel Berger was in my core, so my core really went to crap. It's looking good on Thursday. Friday it went downhill, cut day. So I didn't really have much going on into the weekend. I didn't have enough time to get into any showdowns last week. So overall, I'm just really looking forward to moving on to this week. So yeah, we got the American Express, which is a three course rotation this week. And I think that's probably a good place to start, is just to kind of break down how that works for anyone that's new, maybe into just kind of a review for some people. So the players play three courses this week. It's a full field event. There's the Pete Dye Stadium course, La Quinta Country Club, Nicholas Tournament course. We've got this on the sheet this year. We're showing the course. It's showing the pars. They're all par 72 courses. So how it's structured is that each player is going to play one round on each of those three courses for the first 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So it's set up a little bit different than your standard tournament. And then after Saturday's round three, the cut of top 65 and ties, will move on to the final round on Sunday, and they will play the Pete Dye Stadium course. So that Pete Dye Stadium course gets used 2 out of the 4 rounds for this one. It is the hardest course of the 3. So if you're playing showdowns on all 3 rounds, or 4 rounds, sorry, I guess the first 3 rounds, it's more important to maybe stay away from that stadium course. La Quinta and the Nicholas Tournament course play a little bit easier, almost a full stroke easier than the stadium course. You could definitely, because everyone knows this by now, has been playing the showdown on these multi-course rotations for years. You're probably going to be attacking it the same way. So if you're really keyed in on a player, definitely you can probably get a little bit lower percentage playing some showdowns, and especially if they're on like the stadium course. So that's one way to look at it a little bit. I know some people have even some more advanced strategies where if they're playing full tournament, they may try and concentrate on a few guys. If you're picking between 2 guys and one guy plays the stadium course on the Saturday, going to make the cut, then gets to play it on the Sunday back-to-back rounds. You can maybe find some advantage there, some more recency bias, I guess, if you will, in terms of getting to play it 2 days in a row. But is there anything else that you look for in terms of strategy going into these multi-course rotations?
Yeah, it's definitely. In most cases, I like to go definitely heavier on showdown from what I normally play. Usually, I'm kind of a one lineup guy for showdown for the most part, unless it's a bigger week. The 3-course rotation, like you said, you got to pick out what course you're going to target. Not to say people can't score on all 3 of the courses, but especially if you're making entry lineups, I think you can definitely target a certain course and get some good scores out of that group. As far as stats, I mean, I'm kind of looking, off the tees, not that important to me this week. What was the quote from Rahm a couple years ago about the putting contest thing? That was so funny that he said. So putting is going to be a major thing, but really what that comes down to is having opportunities and being able to convert. It's just going to be a birdie fest. So, of course, to make birdies, you got to make putts. But, you're going to need approach play. You've got some of the guys at the top of pricing that we'll talk about that are really, really good iron players and, can get super hot with the putter in some cases. So I think you need a good balance of both, and we'll talk about that when we talk through the players. But you got to be aggressive all three of these courses. There's some, water, of course, in play at the stadium, but it's not something that you need to back off the gas and be conservative. You need to be aggressive because there are going to be scores on the stadium as well through the week. I don't think it's going to be anything like what has the winning scores been here the last few years. It's of course nothing like the Central.
Yeah, so
But
this tournament's been on for a long time, but the last 9 years it's used this exact same course rotation with these three courses, and usually there's no one that's shot anything under -20, like -19 or anything in the teens. It's always been at least -20, and the defending champ Nick Dunlap, he shot -29, which was a record setter last year out of those 9 years. So we're looking at a really low score. So yeah, I agree that putting is going to be important because if your putter's not on, you're definitely not getting to those low scores. And then on top of that, I think approach. I agree with a little bit more of a broad stat profile this week because we are looking at three courses. I guess if you want to concentrate the most on your stats, you're looking at that Pete Dye Stadium course. Like you said, there's water. There's seven, I believe, seven holes that have water hazards, especially off the tee. So we'll be looking at some danger there. So a lot of ball striking for me, but yeah, you're going to need to hit a lot of greens, give yourself a lot of opportunities for birdie and eagle, and then that's where that putter comes in. So I'll definitely break it down on some of the players that I have on mine. And then we look at the weather forecast for this week, and it's kind of irrelevant this week. Couldn't bring it up on Windfinder. They didn't have it, but I'm looking at the local forecast through just like a weather site, and you're looking at warm weather anywhere between 68 and 73 for the highs, with winds not even going over 6 mile an hour projected for any of those days. So it should be a lot of target in the pin, a lot of putting contests again, and probably going to see a score in that -24 to 28 range is kind of my guess for it. So yeah, we're looking for guys that are going to be red hot with their irons and their putters.
Yeah, the Palm Springs weather is always, of course, something to envy, and that, like you said, 70 degrees and perfect. Does it ever change? I don't think so. But the perfect place to be this time of year when I think you're probably battling negative temps, and we've got some of that actually coming tonight and in the morning. So I'd be happy to be in Palm Springs, but.
I agree.
Anyway,
let's meet there.
Yeah. So, like we said, I think we're targeting guys who can get hot. You're going to need to make a ton of birdies. You do have the extra day this week for the cut. I think that could lend you to taking a shot on a guy a little more, but you're going to need that fourth round anyway. He just has an extra day to make some more birdies. But in terms of GPPs, you're going to need of course, everybody through the cut on a week, especially with the scoring as it is. So we can our structure is going to be similar to what we did last week. We're going to do some builds instead of talking through just directly through the ranges. And we'll hit on, of course, some players as we go through that. And so just a reminder to everybody, if you didn't watch the show last week, we've got the builder tab now on the sheet, and if you make a copy of the sheet for yourself, you can use this to hand build lineups, and you can adjust it to however many you're building. If you're building 3, 5, 10, 20, whatever it may be, the only adjustment you would have to make is copy paste some extra teams down and then come over here and fix the number of teams at the top in J1 to 5, 10, 20, however many you're going to do, and that'll fix the exposure percentages there. So we can start. I don't know. You've got a couple guys highlighted from early in the week. So I guess I'll let you start in terms of where we go in terms of the type of build. Last week we were a little more on the balanced build on the show. This week, we might be a little bit different, but I'll let you get started here at the top.
For sure. First of all, Xander Schauffele, who was, I believe, 11,400, so he was 1,000 more than Justin Thomas at the top. He withdrew yesterday, so he is out. Denny McCarthy was kind of down, I believe, in the mid 7K range. He is also withdrawn. So if you're building lineups early on, you missed that, definitely take them out of your lineup. For me, that kind of made the top tier a little bit easier. As you can see in the early model, we've got 4 of the top 5 in the overall model ranked obviously at the top of the salary is what I'm trying to say here. Plus, we got Patrick Cantlay at 10. But for me, Justin Thomas is going to be GPP only, kind of a secondary play. I'm really keen in on Sam Burns, who's number 1 in my model, and Sung JM. For Burns, he's got some nice course history, finishing 18th or better in 4 of his 5 trips here, including 2 sixth place finishes in 2020 and last season as well. He's coming off a T8 at the Century. Tournament of Champions. Hasn't missed a cut since the PGA Championship, like last May, and since then has reeled off 8 finishes of 15th or better in 10 events, including a runner-up and 4 top 10. So the current form is there, the course history is there. He also fits the stat model I'm looking at that I talked about above, especially looking at the tee to green. He hasn't exactly been there tee to green, 53rd over the last 24 rounds ranking in this field, but he's been absolutely terrific with the putter. He's 8th in putting out of this field. And he also ranks in this field 3rd in par 4 scoring, 2nd in birdies gained. So he's making a ton of birdies in that same sample size. And he's, like I said, he's number 1 in my overall model. And he is sub 10K here. So I really like starting with him at that price. I think he can carry on that momentum with his course history. And I think I'm probably going to end up betting him. I'm kind of looking at targeting like one player at the top for my betting card this week, and then kind of mixing in some of those 40, 50, 60, up to 80 to ones, a couple of them in there as well. But I think Sam Burns is right at the top for me. He's my favorite. And then Sung JM, what I really like about him, with Xander withdrawing, like I said, it leaves 2 players in the 10K range, JT and him. JT sometimes feels like he's got a little bit more upside, but for consistency, especially if you're playing cash games, it's Sung J for me. He's played this event 6 times. He's finished top 25 in all of them. Career high T10 back in 2020. So while he hasn't really cracked that top 10 outside of the tied for 10th there in 2020, he's been incredibly consistent. And then looking at his form, he hasn't missed a cut since the U.S. Open last June, and has since tallied 5 top 10s and 8 top 15s in 10 events. So just incredible consistency from him. And his stats maybe don't jump off the page, but he has been solid across the board. 17th in tee to green, 21st in putting, 10th in par 4 scoring, 17th in birdies gained. That's over the last 24 rounds again. And with the value guys in the field this week, which we'll talk about them some later, I think we can stack Im and Burns in cash, kind of in all formats. I don't mind Im. Like I said, Im is maybe a little bit safer, more of a cash game play. But I think in GPPs this week, just the way it's set up, I like stacking both of those guys together. How are you kind of breaking down that 9K and up range?
Yeah, so I think, and all these guys are probably going to be similar in ownership. There's a lot of names really for this event in this field. Sung J and Burns, I think, may pace in ownership slightly. I think that's probably the way to go, like you said, if you are playing cash games. I'm probably a little higher on JT than you. This is a guy that I just want to be early on because I think he's going to have a massive year.
Yeah.
And he really started to click towards the end of the year. His iron game is back. The question here will always be, can he make enough putts? But, we've seen him have weeks where he can get hot. I mean, we know he can go low. So he can maybe find that putter a little bit. But if the irons, he could ball strike his way around this place and really put himself in contention. My only worry with him would be the putter. So I think I'll be pretty heavy on him up there. The other guy just below the group that you talked about, or you mentioned him, but Cantlay, he seems too cheap in this field. 90, well, now I guess with Xander out when the pricing was done before, but 9,600 is a really cheap price tag. Consistent form, second here back in 21. I think he's interesting. Finau and Wyndham always seem like guys that would fit this type of event. Wyndham's not had great success here. Neither is Finau outside of one finish in 20. But both guys just kind of seem like they're the type of player who you would want in this type of event where you got to go low. They can make a bunch of birdies when they're on. They can miss the cut in this type of thing if they're not making putts. Wyndham's, to me, in my view, is a lot better putter than Finau, but so I would probably lean with Wyndham here. But both guys I think are solid. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the top. If I was starting a lineup, my single entry would probably be JT to start. And again, we talked about last week, I'm not really worried about ownership. And it's not something that I think I'm getting a massive discount. It's just, I mean, because he's going to be within 5%, probably those other two that you mentioned that are solid plays. I just overall think I like JT better. And one thing, to talk on a whole, something that I think my DFS game with PGA kind of is starting to lend itself, and it's something that I need to make a transition to, is to doing at least 20 teams a week. I feel like I'm a lot better at building out a pool than building out a single entry lineup. And various sports that changes for me. Like college basketball, I'm better at building a single entry team than I am at building 20 lineups. And various sports, it just kind of changes. But that's something I'm trying to analyze with my game, is what sports lend themselves to me to being a better multi-entry player. And I think PGA is definitely one of them. So through the rest of the year, that's something I'm probably going to be doing, is either the mini max or 20 teams in the $5 or something like that, or whatever it may be. And I'll probably still, of course, have a single entry build, but maybe in the 12 and the 5 or something like that. But my main focus will be on multi-entry, because I think having a pool of lineups and building those differently than the field is where I can get a better return for myself. And everybody's probably different, but I think that's what I'll be focusing on. So when you're talking building multi-entry teams, and Bob's asking if I play cash, wrong one, cash in PGA, I do not. I know you played cash quite a bit, right? Even in PGA?
I do.
Yeah. So
and just one single lineup is all I used to play in cash games.
Yeah. And I think, like you talked about, I think the M start is probably where I would go in cash games, or burns. I think that range is probably right where I would start. But when it comes to cash games, I would definitely listen to Chris out of myself and I, or out of myself and Chris on these shows. I would definitely listen to his recommendations on that kind of stuff, because I'm always trying to figure out a way to just build differently than the field, for upside. So we can continue our build here. So I've got one. We'll do one, and it's not much of a difference, but I've got one started with Burns, and we'll continue to build down. Is there anybody in the mid-range, or heck, anywhere in the field that really sticks out to you that we could start to kind of craft a lineup around?
Well, I'll jump down kind of to a mid-range guy, because I'm interested to hear what you say, and it's really a comparison to last week. I'm going to jump down to Adam Hadwin. He comes in with terrible form, but he has elite course history. It feels very, very similar to me to what Nick Taylor presented last week at the Sony Open. Nick Taylor came in with very poor form, maybe like one top 25 in his last 5. I'd have to go back to the sheet and look, but it wasn't very good. Hadwin feels the same way. But in 8 events here with this course rotation, he's finished 32nd or better in each of them, with 5 top 6 finishes, including last season. So it's a full-on course history play for me this week. It's not one I probably wouldn't shove him in cash games, because I do like to see, when I'm building a cash game lineup, I want a player that is kind of covering all the bases. Maybe not terrific form, but either really good form, really good course history, or like kind of mid-range on both kind of thing works for me. So just with his form, I don't think I would trust it in cash, but he's a player I definitely like putting in. I think he's got a lot of upside. It feels like the Nick Taylor thing last week, where good course history, it just starting the year, coming in kind of slow off the fall, and then just boom, hits this swing early in the season, and comes to a course he's very comfortable with. and just pops, especially at 7,700. I think there's a lot of upside there with Hadwin. If he pops off with another top 10, that's definitely hitting his value at 7,700. One thing I did want to mention, going back to Bob's question about cash games, it changes each week to what I'm really concentrated on. This week, it's a little bit of form, but it's putting especially. I really want to look at someone that isn't very up and down. I want someone that's going to a consistent putter because that's going to save you, especially in terms of cash games. You get a guy that's very roller coaster ride in terms of his putter on a week to week, losing 4 strokes and gaining 4 strokes. That's more of a GPP play for me at a course when we're looking at shooting -20 to -30 kind of range. So that's definitely how I'm attacking the cash game perspective this week. Um, but Adam Hadwin is someone I know we're kind of building out GPP lineup a little bit in terms of our build here. So Adam Hadwin's one that stands out to me. If we want to jump up a little bit and talk about maybe someone that we can trust in cash, I think we can ignore maybe the course history a little bit, and that's Harry Hall at 8,800. But I really wanted to ask you about both of these guys as I was kind of making notes earlier today and last night. He's number 8 in my overall model. You had talked about him last week. He had a really good week. Poor course history is a miscut last year, T41 and T47, his other 2 trips. That doesn't stand out whatsoever, but he's coming in with just amazing form, way better than he did in each of those other 3 appearances here. He's made all 4 cuts in the fall season, has opened 2025 with 2 straight top tens in Hawaii. And over the last 24 rounds, he's 26 tee to green, fourth in both around the green and putting, which really stands out to me as something that, like I just said, that I will key in on in cash games. So I'd like to see that kind of safety with him. He's fourth in par 4 score and first in birdie or better, or birdies gained over that last 24 round sample size as well. So he feels like an all formats play for me, but I think if I build in a cash game out, I'm probably taking one of him or Burns and then pairing him with Harry Hall. I think gives you a really nice start to a thing. So to a cash game lineup. So Harry Hall, Adam Hadwin. Do you like them both? One or the other? How do you feel about them?
Yeah, I really like Hall. It was the century that I was on him at, and it was like that exact reasoning. It was the birdie or better is the ability to get hot with the putter, and man, that form is wild for him, and it just keeps chugging along. And it's like you got to hop on that hot streak. I think at this point, especially at a place that seems like it would fit the birdies. Type play. Uh, Hadwin is just a guy, that type of profile is just something that I don't ever play. Um, I mean, I get it. I get the course history. It's just I much rather favor form, and I know it's like you said. It's the argument to what I'm saying is that it's early in the year, and they're just getting in the swing of things. They've had somewhat of a layoff, no matter when they've played. And now he comes back to a place that he's crushed in the past. So I get that. He just the form is just something that I have a hard time getting over. But man, it's hard to ignore the course history for sure.
And I think that'll garner some ownership with that course history. It always seems to grab and give you like 2 to 5% boost in ownership when when people are looking at data and they see that, oh, this guy's done well here. Sometimes they just seem to ignore the form, and they'll just plug him in, like even into a cash game lineup. Whereas for me, the form really takes away from me wanting to play him in cash just because of that consistency. But the course history really tells me that there's definitely that upside there and that comfortability with each course. And I know some people may not believe in course history, but I feel that it's true. I don't golf at anywhere near a level that these guys do, but I know that when I go to certain courses that I've played in the past, I know where the rolls are and the greens and stuff like that. A course that you're comfortable with, you feel a lot better on. It's when you go on a golf trip and you go to a bunch of new courses that you haven't golfed before, sometimes you don't feel as comfortable. You don't know the spots. You don't know the landing spots. You don't know the rolls of the green and where to hit it to on the green. So I think that does play a little bit, at least in my mind. So again, not cash game, but definitely GPP. If he was maybe in the 8K range because of that course history, I'd probably be a little more hesitant. But the fact that he's sub 8K, I'm definitely interested. And just to get some of these questions here, Bob, I really appreciate you tuning in. and asking these questions. And I have to ask Dane, because this is a guy I haven't really thought about, is Andrew Putnam. He's 32nd, like this is over the last 24 rounds, 32nd in tee to green, 14th in approach, 10th in around the green. The putting hasn't been great, and he's not making a ton of birdies. He's definitely not on my radar whatsoever in terms of GPP. I just don't think with that not ability to not really go low. He seems like a guy that can make the cut line and maybe finish like the T30 to T50. I think that's fine for cash games. But his price was 7,200 for me. He's a no go for me. There's guys that I like better, and I will talk about them. Like one would be Joe Highsmith, and I've got some notes on him as well. But what do you think, first of all, on Andrew Putnam?
I think he's a GPP filler this
Yeah.
week. Yeah, I think it's not a guy that I would build around, and but I do think I'll have a sprinkle of him. I'm leaning between. I'm trying to decide between 20 and 50 teams this week, and I think he's a filler. Like you said, form's not great, but if you think about his profile, he's a guy that can putt, and
Yeah.
not just because of the first part of the name, but he's got solid course history, and the form's not great, but he does have a couple decent finishes. At the Sony 30th, I mean, last week, that's not horrid. And then he had a couple miscuts to end the fall, but we at least seen a decent finish to start the year. And then comes with the form. He's cheap. 7,200 is pretty cheap for him. I just like the ability for him to make some putts this week.
For me, if I was to counter, if he's looking for someone, a cheaper person, not course history related, but in terms of if you're playing cash games, Bob, or even GPP, I like going a little bit cheaper. And if you're looking for consistency, I like what a couple of guys coming off of KFT Tour last year, Corn Ferry Tour, who were a little bit up and down to start their KFT last year, but finished very strong, starting out with Rico Hoey. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm sorry if it's not. He was more consistent than Highsmith, who's the other guy that I like here in his rookie year, making 18 cuts in the KFT, or in his rookie year last year. But like Highsmith, he finished 13 straight cuts and carried over to 2025 where he made the cut at the Sony. So he's been reeling off tons of cuts, making the cut, which is what we're looking for cash games. But he's also showed some top 25 upside as well over his last 6 events. He's had, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 out of his last 6 are top 25. So I definitely like that. He's got a fairly inconsistent putter, which scares me a little bit, but the around the green game has kind of helped with that a little bit to where he's given himself a little bit of a floor. That's why he's been very, very consistent. And while he missed the cut here last year, I think he can break through. He's obviously coming in with a lot better form than he did last year. So he is one. And then, like I said, Joe Highsmith finished T34 here last year. He's coming off a miscut at the Sony, but before that, he was doing really well. He's got the stat profile across the board. He's 18th in tee to green, 29th in approach, 15th par 4 scoring, 4th in par 5, and 5th in birdie or better gained. So both of those guys are at the 7K level. I probably won't play them both together, but I've kind of mixed in about 50-50 on both of them when I mix it in. And that's why I think we can really stack Burns and M together, because I think we can fit some of these guys from like 7,200 and down. There's like 3 or 4 that I really like. I've got a few highlighted on there at the start of the week. There's a few more that we'll talk about in chat after the show and leading into tomorrow as we build our lineups out. Do either of those guys interest you at the 7K range?
Yeah, I think they're definitely in play. If you look at the build, I think we're going to have to come off of Hall to stack both of those.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the decision point, I think, is because there's a lot of guys that I want exposure to in that 8K range. But I can see the merit to when you got the pricing the way it is, because Xander was in the field when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got kind of condensed pricing of jamming two of them in. But there's a lot of guys in that 8 range that I want to kind of get exposure to. Davis Thompson, good history. He's a birdie guy. Hall,
You can
we
go
already
low.
talked about him. Dunlap won here last year. Solid form coming out of last week. I mean, he made a charge, I think, on Sunday. Willie Z, how about Willie Z bounce back for this year? Cole, Harmon, I think all those guys are solid plays. And then just below that, Nico Echeverria, man, he's had some spike finishes. How about that? Almost won last week in the playoff. And then Ben Griffin, you've got him highlighted as a secondary option. I think from there all the way through the upper 8s is a very strong range. So as I start to play around with some builds, I'm kind of thinking I might be, going one guy at the very top and then kind of see if I can get a lower 9 or mid 9 instead of jamming like a Thomas, Sungjae and Burns. I might try to build away from what might be a popular pairing because I think that 8K range is so strong.
And going back to ownership, I don't think it's as huge unless you can find someone you think is going to be in the same range. Like I agree with you, Sungjae and Burns are probably going to be around near the top 3 in ownership, probably in the 20 to 25% range. Thomas maybe just falls just below 20%, maybe a little bit higher now that Xander's gone. But still, I think him and Burns are going to be 3 to 5% higher. So there's not that big of a difference in pivoting there. There's some pivots that I do like, however, and I do think Ben Griffin falls into that simply because of he probably let a lot of people down last week with his T45, me included. He's got some nice course history, but one that I really like jumping back up to the top, someone we haven't talked about yet, Max Gracerman. He's coming in with some really good form, top 25s in 3 straight, including 2 top 5s. T56 last year, I think maybe will keep people away, but again, he falls kind of in between that Burns, Sungjae, Justin Thomas, who I think are probably going to take the majority of the 9K plus ownership. And then you've got Harry Hall right below. You've got Davis Thompson, who you talked about. He's got some really good course history here in the 2 times he's been here. The form hasn't been great for him, so he maybe comes in a little bit under him. But right between Harry Hall and then those 3 top guys, I think Gracerman, also being maybe a little bit unknown in this field as well, I think could definitely show up. He's been, if we're talking about putting, he's been absolutely amazing with the putter. I think he's gained strokes. We don't have strokes gained data for the WWT and the Zozo, but he finished top 5. He putted very well, so he would definitely be in the positive if there was strokes gained putting for that. And that makes something like we got like 8 or 9 straight where he's gained strokes putting, including 3 events where he's gained 6 or more. And in those, he's popping off a lot of those top 5. So he's got a ton of upside in there, and I think he could be a guy that maybe falls in that 12 to 14% ownership, which is quite a bit of a difference. If you're kind of fading and playing just GPP stuff, you're playing 20 max in there. I do like fitting in some Gracerman, and you probably don't need a whole bunch to be able to have more than the field. And if Sungjae or Burns goes down, and you maybe pair one of them with, say, Burns and Gracerman, and Sungjae and Thomas don't do great, you're kind of jumping ahead of the field there a little bit. So that's something I like for GPP. Bob's asking if we ever build on FanDuel. I don't play a lot of FanDuel myself. It's more of a DraftKings concentration for me a little bit. But going back to Ben Griffin, I'm looking at our salary to odds differential, and he is one of the only players that is clean across the board, showing as a value in all 3 sites, including Yahoo on there to +6. He's a +4 on both DK and FanDuel. So that value probably goes up even a little bit more if we update the odds now with Xander out. I'm not sure if the odds have been updated since then, but I bet you he's even a little bit higher. He should probably be, if Xander wasn't in the field, I would think probably at least in the 82, 8,300 range. So I do like Ben Griffin there a lot as well, like you mentioned. And then the other guy I wanted to ask you about, are you still on McClure? McClure, Meisner, he missed the cut here last year, but He's coming in with some pretty solid form. Now, my only holdup with him, before I let you talk about him, you kind of are the one that got me on him in the first place, um, is the putting. It's been pretty terrible outside the top 100 over the last 24 rounds. It's been up and down, up and down, up and down, almost weekly. But when he does gain strokes putting, he is getting himself good finishes. So the last, let's say, 4 or 5 events where he has gained strokes, any kind of gaining strokes putting, T21, T37, T12, T20, and T5. So when he gets his putter on, he's right up there in contention. At that price, I think we can take the risk that he's going to have a good week putting and probably pop off with the top 20 again, which is probably going to be enough at his price tag of 7,400.
Yeah, I think you laid it out perfect. I think you said the definition of of the GPP play there. Could he get hot with the putter? If he does, he's going to have a really good finish, and if he don't, then oh well.
Yeah.
He's not going to have a good finish, like you said. So he's got to have the putter, and if he does, he's probably going to pop for what could be a GPP winning score. And I think you're right on there. There's some guys, and we'll finish out this build, maybe do one more before we get out of here. But there's a few more guys in the sevens that I think are really interesting that can get hot with the putter. You got JT Poston, good history here. Hoagie he's more of the iron guy who, he's had just solid overall ball striking when he's came here. The Zayden Hoot was second here a year ago. He's always a guy that the opposite. He can get hot with the putter. Lee Hodges, man, the form for him is just something else. And he was third here on debut in 22, but 10th at the Sony, 5th and 16th to end the fall swing last year. And, I mean, he had a really strong year overall back towards, I think when was it he won? The 3M? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that was last year, right?
Yeah.
Or am I like losing it? Yeah,
Nope.
that was. Yeah, won the 3M the year before, maybe. Yeah, he won the 3M the year before, but he had a strong, year with some 12th place finishes and things. But he's really coming on recently, so I think he's in play in the mid sevens. Do we get a
He's
Burger
figured out the
bounce
putter
back?
as well, which is awesome.
Yeah. Do we get a Burger bounce back? I don't know. I feel like it's one of those flop lag spots that I have to include him in tournaments to play. But man, the putter, and I talked about this last week briefly towards the end. But remember, I said you had mentioned about how he had gained strokes at I think the RSM, and I said on Sunday it felt like he missed every single putt. Well, guess what? He missed every single freaking putt last week to miss the cut on the first 2 days. So he seems to be really up and down with that stick right now. But decent history. The form's kind of up and down, but man, he's gonna pop. This guy's got talent. He's gonna probably work his way back up to where he would not be a $7,500 golfer in this field. Like he's a guy you think of being in the mid eights back when he was not in full swing coming before the injuries. Meissner, like you said, I think he's a solid play. I'll be interested to see what people do with Keith Mitchell because I think people love to play Keith Mitchell for whatever reason.
Killer
And
Keith.
he's like the perfect guy for me that if nobody's going to play him, I'll take a shot on him. But if people are going to play this guy, no, I'm out. So that one will come down to ownership for me as to whether I include him in the pool or not, because he's had good history here as well. So when we're talking about the build, as a very quick note, there's a couple things on the sheet that we'll have added either tonight or tomorrow. We're going to have tee times in the courses that we'll get on there. or maybe just the courses because the tee times are so bunched together. And then the other thing was I said last week about the Corn Ferry stats, so I'll get that up as well here in a bit. So, and then before we finish these builds off, Bob had a quick question about, and I think you've already answered it but I'll give my take on it about the cash. So in NFL, people consolidating cash games on these certain plays, and NBA, the same way. There's certain guys that are massive chalk in cash games, and a lot of times it's because they're the best plays, and you're going to play them. I think PGA is a little looser in that rule. Because you want to still have some crossover to block people out on certain guys. And there's reasons, just like in any sport, why certain players are super high owned in cash. Maybe they're just completely mispriced compared to the odds that they present to win or whatever it may be. But on the flip side of that, I think you can get a little bit more different than in other sports in PGA because of the variance. And I think what that does for you is if you're hitting those plays on a consistent basis, maybe it's just one person, and I'm not talking like you play somebody who's going to be 1% owned, but let me try to find a decent example this week. Let's see here. Like, who would be somebody who's going to be pretty popular in cash games, maybe at a lower price, because those are the ones that have the highest variance, are the lower price guys.
I honestly think Adam Hadwin could be one of them just because of his course history.
Yeah, so like that would be
pumped up.
that would be a perfect example for me. Adam Hadwin, I would swap off of that. And you're taking the stand of his form's just not there. And it's not that he's going to be so high on that you're just buried if you don't play him and he finishes 10th. You can swap from him to like a Bezadenhout, who I don't think he'll get as much ownership, maybe half the ownership. Cash games, it consolidates a little more than in GPPs. So
before we head off on that, the other big difference for me that I didn't mention in my reply there to him, in NFL, the reason we see some players week to week get so high percentage owned and a lot of it in terms of value plays is because you'll see the pricing come out on Sunday afternoon to Sunday evening for the following week's tournament, and then we'll see players, start to get ruled out during the week, and that maybe DraftKings or FanDuel, for that matter, didn't see coming. They didn't price it in yet, so you're getting the backup who's going to be a lead dog, especially from the running back position. Running back goes out on Tuesday or Wednesday. The pricing's already set, and now you've got a $4,000 to $5,000 running back as a backup because of that price and the fact that he's going to get 15 to 20 touches. That player is going to be extremely high owned. Where we don't really have that not problem. It's not really a problem, but we don't really have that scenario in PGA where someone like Xander Schauffele's out. He doesn't have a direct replacement that is 6,500. It's not a team sport, obviously, so we don't really see that in golf. So that's one of the big differences in why when that happens in NFL, you almost need that backup running back at 4,500 because he is so mispriced that a guy that's getting 15 to 20 carries in a game should not be that low a price. And if we knew that information before the pricing came out, he'd be $6,000, not 4,500 or 5,000. We don't see that necessarily in golf as much. So that is one of the big differences for me.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's a great note on the pricing. So let's finish off this build of jamming a couple up top, and then we'll flip over to maybe a slightly different build where we play JT up top, but then we drop down a little bit as well. So the three and we'll throw in one of your sevens guys, I think would be the next spot to go here, either Highsmith or Hoey. Pick and choose wherever you want to go there, but we'll go Highsmith for now. So that leaves 7,600 for the last two. So we had Burns M at the top, and then we dropped into the sevens and had Hadwin and Highsmith. So you can do a couple things with this. If you wanted to play like a 7K or 71, 7,200 and below, and then you can get back up into the eights or the high sevens, because I think that's where the higher upside plays are. Or you can just play like a Bezadenhout. Let's see, you could play a Bezadenhout and Lee Hodges or Berger, or one of those combinations. You could play, let's see, where was the other one? I was going to say Griffin and Meissner. You could do that one. So there's a lot of options depending on how you want to fill out that lineup there, because you do have, I think, the ability to jam two of those high-priced guys in this week. So to me, this is just my tournament brain working a little bit. It's like, if that is easy to do when I start playing around with builds, people are going to do it. And, I talked briefly about something last week, product ownership. And when you just have a guy or two in your lineup that's lower owned, and this is something that I've started to do when I'm using optimizers in other sports, I'll just filter in and say, like I did it for NFL over the weekend, where I said I want at least one person in my lineup who's under 10% owned in all the lineups that it builds. Well, that, you can play, if you are playing those two at the top, M and Burns, but then you throw in somebody under 10, how many people have that three-man combination? And then you've got still two other ones that you're probably not going to have. They're not going to be over 20 as well. So if they're in the mid-teens, you're just getting different. And the way that you set yourself up, it's not all about your total ownership, because you could have 25% owned golfers or something, and then one 10% guy. Well, you're not any different. You've got a bunch of 1v1s and 2v2s that you're going against to get to the top. So you're in tournaments, to get to the top is so much harder when you do that. But when you add 2-3 guys that are fairly low owned into your lineup, just as a construction discussion here, you can then start to say, well, if this goes right, now I can get to the top a little easier, as opposed to it just having to be, I'm going to play, let me just pick out some random person down here. I'm going to play Toasty this week because he's 1% owned, and if he hits and gets, into the top 10 this week, the rest of my lineup is going to be, well, you still got to get the other guys right as well. So that's, I think, getting different in how you're constructing lineups instead of just saying, I'm going to get different by playing this 1% on golfer, is kind of something that I've gotten a little better at from maybe how I used to play. So as we finish out this build, again, I think there's a lot of different options to do what I just said, in terms of choosing somebody who's fairly low on the ownership scale, like a Bezadenhout. I don't think will have a ton of ownership, and then I don't know about Lee Hodges. I mean, none of these guys down here should get super high owned. So like I said, Lee Hodges, I think he would be an interesting piece. And then you got two guys that are under 10 for sure, at least I would think, that go with your chalkier up top combination. So that would be that build. Now let's try to play around with, we'll take that one off and just start out with JT at the top. All right, so we got 7,900 left, and a couple of pieces that I would be interested in trying to do is, again, I like this upper 7-8K range. If I can get 2, maybe even 3 of those guys in a lineup, I'm skipping, some of the bigger name values like a Burns, M, Cantlay, Finau, Clark. But this is a tournament that has a lot of variance because of the amount of birdies, the 3 different courses. There's just even more variance in a week like this, and you got to embrace it in tournaments. So you go JT, and then you skip some of those names, and you play. Let's just do the Harry Hall. Willie Z is a guy that, he's one of those that I think really lowers your product ownership when you're looking at stuff like that. And I think you can get, if you play a guy like him in the middle, compare him to what I just talked about with Toasty. You're playing somebody in the mid-8s who we know, if he can get back into the form that he was in before all the injuries, we know the type of player he is. You're taking a shot on a low-owned Will Zalatoris that could win majors at some point in his career, as opposed to, and I'm not picking on Toasty, but let me go even farther down. I said I wasn't going to mention this guy, but Bronson Burgoon.
There it is.
Very bottom. 1% on Burgoon down there. You're not just taking a shot on somebody who hardly even plays on the PGA Tour and finishes outside the cut line most every week and just hoping he hits and finds a week. You're taking shots on a guy who we know has massive talent. So I think that could be a way to do it. So let's just throw 2 of those in here, and then maybe an upper 7s guy like a Griffin, Nico. We'll just do Griffin for now. It can be any of those guys. So you play those 3 or those 4 names, JT, 2 8s, and then an upper 7. Now you got 7,300. You're basically in a similar spot to where we were left before. And you have a different setup. I think a lot of people are going to jam 2 of those guys up top. So I think this is just a different setup, and a week that I really like the 8s. I think you can get away with doing it. So even when you come here, you can play one of your 2, Hoey or Highsmith, at 7, and you've got you'd have 76 left at that point. Yeah, you're back into the mids. You got Meissner, you got Berger, you got
Hodges.
Yeah, you got a ton of options there for those last 2 spots. I wonder what the deal. Did you see much news on the Thor Bjornsson WD last week that came the morning of?
I did not.
So he's in the field, I guess, this week, 72. I mean, this seems like a spot that we would like him in. I just wonder. I need to do a little more digging before I do rankings and stuff tomorrow, because 7,200 is cheap for him. What was he last week? Like 74, 75, and we were pretty in. I mean, I liked him quite a bit. Ended up, of course, not playing him because he didn't play. But I think that's a guy that we could go back to as well. So, and then there'll probably be some, guys that Corn Ferry guys that you briefly talked about. A guy that I want to do some digging on is Frankie Sappin, and I'm probably blanking or butchering that name. But 6,800, he has always struck me as a high upside player. So I want to look at some of the stats on him, and a birdie guy is kind of where I'm going with that. So, and I don't think he's going to be played at all. If you just needed some fillers down in there to fill out multi-entry stuff, he might be one that we can look at. And you've got some other guys highlighted down in there in the mid-6s. Peterson looked good last week, 10th. Wesley Bryan, you've got him highlighted. And then Norlander, who started out really well. And that was I ended up putting him in the core for round 1 showdown. And that really paid
off. For round 1.
Yeah, work for round 1. So those are the type of plays when you get down into that range that, maybe if you're it's just the way it is. Certain guys are better showdown plays than they are week long. That's just the way it is. And he might be one of those guys that if he gets to La Quinta or Nicholas or whatever course we end up targeting for that day, and we fit him into the pool of those golfers, I think he could be one of those that we look at doing that for, because he can get hot on a certain day. He just might not be able to do it the whole week.
I agree. And you mentioned Peterson. He's is a really good story this year. Um, I think I read somewhere where he's had like 6 different tour cards across the world. So he's kind of played a little bit everywhere. He's played so many different courses. 36-year-old rookie coming off a really solid KFT season last year, where he had 3 top 10s and he had a win in his, I think it was the third to last tournament of the year. Didn't do so great at it. He missed the cut the next week and then had like a T59 at the Tour Championship. But I think he's got some upside there, especially at 6,600. In his first 2 PGA Tour events so far, he's T25 at the RSM. And what really stands out there for that is he lost 6 strokes on approach. And you think, okay, you're losing 6 strokes on approach. There's no chance you ever had any chance at making any birdies. But he also gained 7.2 strokes putting. And in those 2 events, the RSM and the Sony Open, he's gained strokes both around the green and putting, in both of those together. So I think there is a lot of upside with him. 36-year-old rookie, but I think it definitely stands out. I'm not seeing another top 10 like it was at the Sony, where he gained strokes across every single stroke gain category. But I think he's got a good enough putter around the green game, kind of an all-around tee to green game, where he can definitely make the cut. So he's someone that I would consider if you're building a Stars and Scrubs cash game. That's someone that I would probably be fitting in if you're trying to fit 3 guys, say from 8K up, including 2 of those top guys that we talked about. He's someone that I'm definitely considering putting in one of those lineups.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So last piece, and then we can get out of here, or give some final thoughts. So Bob is asking, and I should have mentioned this at the start of the show, but the one and done, we run one every year for our members, and we've pushed it off a couple weeks to start the year. Usually we started every week at the Sony, just trying to get both more people and find a maybe a cleaner, quicker way to do things. And we've done that. So there's for anybody who is a member or wants to become, check the Discord. We've got some notes in a couple different places on joining that. And it will start next week, no matter if we get more entries or not. So the Farmers next week is a hard stop on pushing off the one and done. It's the first. I mentioned it last week. It almost feels like the start of the year in a lot of cases at Torrey Pines. So I'm really excited for next week, and it will start. I don't want to go anywhere past that. And we've, we're at about the amount of entries that we had last year. I would like to push it a little higher. So if anybody wants to get in, definitely get in. It's a $50 entry. We usually pay top 2. So that's probably what we'll do again. And we're going to do it through this year through Run My Pool, which will keep us from having to get picks through Discord and update our sheet every single week. So that, that was always the hardest part to us because we got so much else going on with sheets and real life it's just hard to keep up with people's picks and stuff like that, which we've done for years. So using this is going to be, I think, really beneficial. I'm sure there'll be some missed picks in there from people, but it is what it is.
There always is.
Miss my picks half the weeks, but just kidding. Here and there, I probably will. No lie. But so a lot of people have already joined up into the pool on the site. So check that out. It'll be starting next week. Invite your friends. We'd love to have them in here and build that thing up to, heck, I would love to have like 20 entries at least in that thing. We've usually had 10 or less, and it's just been a kind of a fun thing that we do as a group for whoever wants to join. But man, I would love to have 20, 50 entries into that thing. And we would, of course, expand the payouts a little bit in that case, and we won't know the final payouts until next Thursday. But feel free to invite anybody that you want to join up and join the one and done.
And try and beat the defending champ, which is hilarious because I started out last year absolutely terrible, and I think I had 3 winners in a row, and that pretty much propelled my whole season. It was absolutely
Yeah, I
incredible.
remember.
I went on a hot run, and boom, that was all I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, any last
Yeah.
thoughts on the Amex?
No, not really. We're looking for a ton of birdies. We're looking for guys who are going to get hot with the putter, obviously give themselves opportunities for that putter to gain them some birdies. And again, if you're playing Showdown, stay tuned to our chat because we will be going over round 1, 2, 3, and 4 Showdown cores, who we're targeting, percentages owned, who's playing on what course. Like Dane said, we're going to be looking at some tee times and all of that kind of information in chat. So if you haven't yet, definitely go and sign up. I provided the link in the chat. Scroll up to the top, and you will find a link to sign up to our Patreon or our WAP. We offer both of those for you guys to come in and sign up and see what we're all about. Discord chat's where it's at. And yeah, we'll see you in there. And let's have a winning week, everybody.
All right. Good luck. We'll see you next week for the Farmers.